University. Thank you, Chief, for for an excellent film, very moving and enlightening. Now, of course, the devil seems to be everywhere. The devil is in the big picture. The devil is in the details, of course. And I would like to ask you a question about the details. It's, of course, a race against time. There are several processes parallel. One of those is the constitutional review. Now, in regard to well, let's assume that people have not been arrested. What do you think about the wisdom of having a referendum on the constitution in that context?
I think even if people are arrested, I think the tensions in the country will depend upon whether there's political elite consensus or not. It really is, this is beyond arrest. I think the constitutional issue is one that depends upon Kibaki on one side and Odinga on the other side. And if they don't have an agreement, particularly around the issue of the arrangements of power, then we're in trouble. And so far, the Kibaki side wants a complete imperial presidency with very, very few checks and balances, and Odinga side wants a complete imperial prime minister without any checks and balances. So they basically want the same thing. They want total power. One wants it as a prime minister, and the other wants it as a president. So there's not much difference, but it's where the power is, because then they think they can marshal their forces around that. I think that, so if they don't agree, the country will be tense, be very tense. And I think, and I'm not sure that a constitution that's passed with 50% is a valid constitution, is a legitimate constitution. You know, I think constitutional reform needs to have a really overwhelming support. It needs to be 65% or and above for it to be a legitimate constitution. It can be legal, but not be legitimate. I'm not quite sure, Anders, on this where I stand. I've been going back and forth.
An interesting question with regard to the constitution. I mean, as we have seen from many other countries, I mean, could the constitution in itself be an instrument in furthering even further violence between the different communities?
Well, you know, in 2005 there was a referendum on a new constitution, and I think it played a role actually in increasing tensions, because this is when now the whole alliance, the political alliances that we took to the election started, and it was almost the entire country in one side and one community, the Kikuyu community, on another. And I think those tensions went on growing and growing until we went to the elections. Now, it's not that the constitution itself, as a document, will lead to tensions. It really was the processes that brought the trouble, and then how people were phrasing, how the leadership was phrasing the debates that were there. So we went to a referendum without really discussing the content. We were discussing process. We were to a referendum on the presidency of Kibaki and how he had done. So a referendum on whether it was inclusive or exclusive, you know, whether his leadership had been inclusive or exclusive. And I think the country voted quite strongly that they thought Kibaki was a very exclusive type of a leader, and they didn't like that. So but they did that as part of saying yes or no on the constitution. So that added to the tensions that were there.
Great one, and this is what we need so that we don't forget what happened. We don't know what 2012 is going to hold, but we hope things will improve. My name is Jared Odero, also at the Stockholm University. Now, 2 points here. Reforms. What you've shown us, you know, on a one-to-one basis with some of the members of the police force doesn't really depict what we were even assured the other time when the Prime Minister was here, that there'll be serious reforms in the police force. What is the way forward? Secondly, the victims. I mean, it's pathetic. Honestly, there should be some redress. Are we heading there? Those two areas. Thank you.
On the police reforms are difficult. Any country which has got a bankrupt, corrupt police force, you have to take that very carefully, because you don't want to unleash people, you know, large numbers of people who are not reformed back in society. I think any Kenyan will tell you that practically every major crime has police involvement, either directly or indirectly, where they've taken the payoffs or something. So I don't know what the solution is to reforming the police. I mean, it's not about just adding income and the salaries. There's one big part there. But I think the first part had to be leadership change, and then putting mechanisms of accountability within the police. So at least they begin to police themselves in a better way than they do. But it's going to be a process, and I think, and I've been trying to look around different countries which have tried to reform their police forces, and some have been quite successful. I think the city of New York in late 1800s did a pretty good job in terms of reforming the police force. It was very corrupt, and it was turned around by Theodore Roosevelt, who then became the Vice President of the United States. But there's some examples like that, and I know South Africans have been toying and struggling with police reform since 1994. You've got Denmark to come and help them to retrain and work, but they also had a hard time firing existing police officers, because and that's one of the reasons why there's so much crime. So it's a difficult thing, but leadership counts. Leadership counts. So it was impossible for Kenya to have police reform as long as Ali was there. They've replaced Ali with Itere, who was the commander of the GSU during the violence.
So GSU.
The GSU is a paramilitary police. It means General Service Unit. It's supposed to be the elite unit within the police, and then they did a lot of killings and rape. And this guy was the one who was commanding it, So you would think, they're not serious at all. So until you get leadership that makes sense there, then you can begin saying, now how do we move the process of police reform? But it's a paramount thing. We can't really, until we get a police force we can trust. We're really just scratching stuff. The victims and survivors, to be honest, the group that I feel the most for in terms of victims and survivors are the people in Nyanza. Even the language of Kenyans doesn't treat them right. If you look at the narratives in the media, we talk about IDPs from Eldoret, from Molo and others, and Kisii IDPs. When people talk about the Luo who are expelled, they call them migrant workers. Like a migrant worker has less of a right to be there than anybody else. So there's language issues where we have to be careful about, and there's no support. There's absolutely no support, around there. So if you saw the woman in Kiambaa, she was treated up to a point, and then they said we can't treat you anymore. They sent 5 people who abandoned the Kiambaa church for surgery abroad, and they said they've only got money for 5. This is the same government that's buying cars left, right, and center. They can't afford to treat people.
On that level, how are children resulting from the rapes? How are they treated?
They're left on their own. The victims of rape that I have talked to are just on their own. The group of women that I met there, and there's a story today in the Nation about others who are raped. They're just ignored, just forgotten. There's no support system. The NGOs are not much involved.